Friends, today we are reflecting on John 19, verses 26 through 27, where the author writes, "When Jesus saw his mother there, and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to her, 'Woman, here is your son.' And to the disciple, 'Here is your mother.' And from that time on, this disciple took her into his own home." I had a friend named Neil. Neil passed away several years ago from cystic fibrosis. Neil would have needed a second double lung transplant in order to survive, but it never came through. Neil was such a good friend that when I got to spend time with him, even when it was hard for Neil to breathe, he would still ask me how I was doing. Even when he was really struggling, he would give me advice or tell me something that he saw about God's person and heart towards us and why it matters. And I can tell you from experience that while words can be thrown around sometimes and meaningless or easy to use, when someone you care about is struggling to breathe and they still take time to ask you how you are and to love you, it means so much. And so when we read these verses today and understand that Jesus is suffering on the cross and suffocating, and yet he chooses to use these words, this is not to be taken lightly. And the author, John, here is not just sharing with us an account, but he thinks it's really important for us to know this, and that it tells us something about who God is, and it relates to our life in the here and now. And so I want to share a few reflections on this. The first thing that strikes us is that, one, yes, Jesus is absolutely taking care of his mom. And I think it teaches us something, and it reminds us something about what our responsibility is to our parents and what God's heart is and how we relate to our parents. But something more and something bigger is going on here as well. Because if Jesus had just said, "Woman, here is your son," if the verse just stopped there, I would think it was just about somebody taking care of his mom. But the verses go on to read, and to John, "Here is your mother." See, Jesus is on the cross doing the work that he came to do. And it starts all the way back in the Garden of Eden in Genesis 1, where people were in a garden with God and they had relationship with God, perfect relationship with God and perfect relationship with one another. And when sin and death entered, those relationships were broken. Our relationship with God was broken, and our relationship with one another was broken. And so here Jesus is taking on the sin and the death and the shame and the brokenness of the cross, of the world on the cross, so that he can restore our relationship with God. But he's also restoring the relationship we have with one another. And this is a snapshot, this first tiny snapshot of what Jesus' vision for his family on earth, his church, is to look like. And it's this adoptive family that loves and cares for one another, because it's the thing that God wants for us, and because it's the very best thing for us to do is to be in these relationships with one another. But I also want to share that Jesus teaches us what it is to suffer. I've met people who've suffered and had every excuse to be selfish and self-absorbed and to not have to think about or care about somebody else. But I've also met people who have suffered well, people who have suffered, and in that time they've loved and shared and shown concern and shown kindness to others. And I'm telling you, it's life-changing when you encounter someone who does that. And Jesus is showing us that even with the weight of the world on him, suffocating him to death, Jesus' heart is for people. He loves people, and he's concerned for people in the here and the now on earth. And that includes you and me today. And that's why we can celebrate Easter. And that's why we can rest in God's promises. And that is why we have hope in Jesus.